So now we heard three perspectives from three experts, you could say, and let's have just continue that discussion a bit on how you can combine all these three perspectives into a product initiative. So one thing that I often get the feeling is that product initiatives are mostly anchored in one or maybe two of these three perspectives, but not all three. Do you agree on that? First.
Yeah, definitely. And I see, like I was saying before, I think it's very important. And another strategy that we have, if you look at AI and everything, you say if you just analyze the data, you can mine gold. It will find out everything. We don't do that. We say it's very important to have the data and the domain knowledge of the experts and the human side of it as well. Because if you do that, if you actually use the information that the engineer has grown over the year, when you create the product, you have a smaller hypothesis space. It's larger chance that you will succeed, and the engineer will trust the solution better because they know how it works and know that their knowledge to go into it. All right. So I think definitely it's you need to combine it in a good way.
Is there somewhere you should always start, you think?
With the problem.
But maybe I shouldn't be the one saying this, but I think also technology, you have to have a lot of respect because technology takes time to develop, really good technology. And I think it is always to balance, because if you want to be best, you also need to explore technology, because it can be a little bit like when you find a problem, you might have technology that you can, pick and choose from. And maybe it's not perfect when you start, but you can understand how to do it. So I think you can't say, it's maybe not always, because technology enable opportunities also. So, but you should always be, as you said, be aware about and be out there to see what's happening in the world around us on a bigger scale, but also dig in the ground together with the customers and understand the contextual aspect of where you are and where you want to contribute and by solving problems.
I also think that it's important to actually start and start small.
Yeah.
Because in many of our projects that we've been in, the customers come with one idea. We want to solve this problem. But it turns out that this is actually another problem that should be solved. And sometimes you look at the two big problems. So we say, don't boil the ocean, start with something, especially if it's about innovation, right? And then grow on that as you learn. So start with starting.
And that's interesting, because if you work with chainsaws, I guess that none of you would like to use a chainsaw that doesn't behave like you would expect it to behave. So I think, and that's really our challenge. I think we talked about that with my colleagues, because with this digital new and what you represent, you don't need to be perfect, and you can really start small. But there are some things where you need to secure that you don't put people at risk. So it's a right balance.
Yeah, and
time and timing.
If you include the tech in this and the security and how can you trust a machine learning based system, that's a huge area, and it's hard, and that's why we have just joined a European research project around that for 3 years to look at how you can validate and ensure machine learning based systems, right?
Tove, a question for you. If you have a chainsaw or a product that is not connected and you go to a connected business, let's say like that, it often demands some adaptations to, for example, the organization to handle the relationship you get with the customer, and also maybe continuous development that we talked about during the presentations. How can you handle those adaptations that is needed to make something successful?
There, I think Rickard had a very important comment here. I think if we have a safe, trusted product there, and we want to connect it and want to learn what's happening when you all of a sudden get a lot of information, or you can start to track behaviors or things, do these kind of really dirty prototyping with silver tape, and just by learn to understand what's happening in the meeting between the digital new and the more traditional mechanical solutions. So I think that type of prototyping is super important, and there to invite the users and observe them and be with them and really see what's happening quickly.
Yeah.
And iterate so many times.
And as a large corporation, how do you create that environment that can combine these aspects when if you go into have a new product idea that you want to realize some way? Is there any tips for the people in the room?
Yes, or no. No, but I think one important thing that we learned through all the experiments and POCs and those cross-functional collaborations, design thinking, I think, is a structured method, but I think it always starts with being in the context with the users and really be there with them. But I think that seeing is believing. I remember back in 2014 or something, we just did a skunk work within a week. We took a boring tractor and we put some connectivity on it, and we created some quick apps, one for each member in the group management. And then they can come into the reception and they downloaded the app, and then, they could push the button, and then the tractor were sending a sign to them. And then we could instruct them how to start up the machine. And they were like, oh shit, can we do that? Yeah, so we did that in a week, but all of a sudden they connected to, we can actually do something with this digital new thing. But I think seeing is believing is important. The biggest problem is not amongst the primary development people. It is, I think it's maybe the ones sitting with the money sometimes, at least in the beginning. So slight different challenges depending on what you want to do.
Okay. And we shouldn't fool ourselves to think that we actually believe and understand how a totally new product will be used by the users. It really has to be tried by the users in experiment and in learning. If we think we can invent something great from scratch, I think we're like 99% failure.
And that's why I think these dirty prototypes, as I call them, you really should take this chainsaw. Then you put and you just wrap it so everyone can see this is not perfection. This is
Cheap.
Yeah, exactly.
Or dirt.
Going to a large company to a smaller company then. You talked about a lot of business and technology, and you're working with the human side. But how important is the human side, and how do you work with that as a deep tech company?
Yeah, like I mentioned before, we, in a way, often, since our solutions are embedded in the systems, we will have maybe a third party doing the user interface. And then, of course, you have an interaction with that, and how will that affect it? But then it's as well, because also when you work with machine learning and AI, you have this trust issue. And if you don't have the people that are going to use it, if they don't trust the product, or if the engineer who are going to use it doesn't trust it, they won't use it. So that's why we focus on gaining that information and trust, and also that our customer can actually explain what's happening inside. So it's not black magic, right? It looks like that when it got sufficiently complex, but it's not. So if you can explain something, then you get everyone with you, and that's how we try to bring in that aspect, so I would say.
Cool. Marcus, you have a quote on your homepage saying, "Creativity is allowing yourself to make mistakes. Art is knowing which ones to keep."
Oh.
This question, yeah. How do you know which ideas to keep?
We don't. It's a simple reply. But if the question is really what failures to keep, or what learnings to explore, or what products to continue to invest in, because there are many aspects of this question, really. But if we focus on what failures to explore more, if we focus on that, I would say that any failure that leads to a new, deeper understanding of either the end user's sort of perception or user or need of this, or again, a value chain or an ecosystem understanding of it, and that can be sort of enhanced and scaled to a good business. That's something to keep. So basically, if you can develop it and improve it and scale it, it's really an important failure, I would say. Whereas a bad failure, as opposed to a good failure, would be something where you learned nothing and you couldn't really use that failure into scaling or building a successful business. That's pretty obvious, but it's really difficult to
do. Yeah.
To do.
I know.
It's so much easier said than done.
And another difficult question then. So I usually say when I work with customers that finding the value is, you need really to find a value. Otherwise, everything you do is probably too expensive. But it's also difficult to finding the value. Do you have any ideas? How can you find the value, the total value of an idea?
Ooh, yes. Wish you gave me more simple questions. I just got back from Hong Kong and I'm really jet lagged. So, but I'll give it a try.
Our fault, I guess.
Well, the value, and again, it's a structured process, and we actually apply. This is one of the areas where we apply a very strict process in understanding the value. So we need to understand that it actually solves a problem, and that the end user is willing to pay to have that problem solved, and how much is that problem worth, if you like. Okay, so that's the individual part of it. And then we need to understand how that can be scaled, and we need to understand what are the differences in a user using that in Sweden compared to in Hong Kong or compared to in South America, because the business case for the individual users will typically be very different depending on labor cost or office rental cost or anything like that. So it's really a very complex situation to analyze, but it always starts with how much is the end user willing to pay for having that problem solved.
Yeah, and I would say as well that, I mean, in our case, we bring a new technology into a company, so that there are new possibilities, and sometimes they seem endless. And again, I would stress this, that the Chris DM says as well, that when you're going to choose what to do, if you have many possibilities, look at the business value, of course, but bring as many people with different competence into the room as possible, so you cover all aspects. The management, so you get the support, the salespeople, the engineers, and the end users, right? And then you can together have a better chance in a way to choose the right track or ID to go for. That would be my advice, I would say.
Good. Anything you want to add?
No, I really like this cross-functional. I think it's vital and it's super important, but I also believe in friction. If there is no friction between the competences or the people, then it's probably something really bad. But when you get some really good friction, that's when things start to happen. Because that's when you start people to stay awake and use their brains.
Very good. Thank you so much for being here tonight and presenting your thoughts on these three perspectives. I would like to have Jan-Åke on stage.
Yes. Coming. Thank you so much, Tove.
Thank you.
Big hand for our guest speakers, Rickard and Marcus.